Hey everyone, it's Jody from This Day, also joined by some other familiar voices.
Hi, it's NIki.
Hey there, it's Kellie.
As listeners have hopefully heard by now, we are halfway through our fall fundraiser for Radiotopia, which is our network of independent podcasts.
And look, one of the things that we love about doing the fundraiser is hearing from people as they support Radiotopia and finding out why you are supporting us. I mean, it means so much when we hear from you. There's actually this Slack channel where when donations and comments come in, we can see it, and I just love seeing it roll by. It's not just an ego boost to see people say nice things about us, but it's also like a real reminder of what we're in it for.
Yeah, it's really sweet. Like this comment from Chadwick, he says, I love the This Day podcast. Fantastic, educational, and fun. Oh, thank you, Chadwick.
Now, is that it? Fantastic, educational, and fun? Is that basically the only three things that matter? And is that the order? Is that the right order?
I think it's the right order. Well, I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna second guess Chadwick. I also love this one from Jared because it gets at why give. This is what he wrote. What got me to donate was the idea of donating to many of my favorite podcasts, and that I might be contributing to a show that doesn't even exist yet, that might become one of my favorites. Keep up the good work.
Love that.
That's very nice. Yeah, and that's true. You are investing in Radiotopia as a whole. I will also say that Jared, who wrote that in, he wrote favorite twice with a U in there, which makes me think that he's writing from overseas. So shout out to all the overseas listeners and members of Radiotopia. But look, as Jared pointed out, donating is a vote of confidence in a business model and an ethos of collective independent creators, which, as I think you know, listeners, is very, very rare and in short supply these days.
And as of this recording, we are about halfway to our goal of 1,500 donors before December 31st. So if this day has meant something to you this year, please make your tax-deductible donation today, right on our website at thisdaypod.com. Your donation is split among all the creators in this network, so everyone really gets to benefit.
Yeah, and every gift helps get us closer to our goal. So visit us at thisdaypod.com, and thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello and welcome to This Day, a history show from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, December 1971, a black member of the U.S. House of Representatives resigns from the United States delegation to the United Nations to protest what he called the stifling hypocrisy of the Nixon administration's policy toward many African countries. This representative was Charles C. Diggs of Michigan, and he had been central to the campaigns over apartheid, organizing both political and public protest and pressure campaigns to counter South African apartheid and the U.S. allegiance to the apartheid regime. The U.S. had several times throughout the 60s refused to add its name to UN resolutions condemning apartheid. So here in this moment was Congressman Diggs resigning from his role as part of a UN delegation, the only person to have ever done so up to that point. So let's talk about this incredible act of protest from Representative Diggs and get to know Charles Diggs a little bit and his career in general. Here, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
And our special guest for this episode is Dr. Marion Orr, political scientist and professor at Brown, who recently wrote a book about Charles C. Diggs. I'll say that we are hooking this to his work around apartheid, but Diggs is arguably the most consequential black congressman in U.S. history. His story spans the civil rights movement, the halls of power, the anti-apartheid movement, and then at the end of his career, accusations of taking bribes and kickbacks. And the book gets into all of it, as will we. So, Dr. Orr, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be on your program. Thanks for having me.
And congrats on the new book. So let's go right to that moment of the resignation. I think listeners maybe got a sense of it from my intro, but to me, I see this as a moment of Diggs, who had cared about this issue for a long time, kind of getting fed up and saying, you know what, I'm out. How did he get to that point?
Well, Diggs was really was the first Congress member in the U.S. House and indeed the Senate to take a real interest in Africa, and especially what was happening in Southern Africa. So he really, since the 1950s, 1959, he became a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and began immediately to focus on Africa. And so he's been really trying to push both Republican and Democratic administrations to loosen and indeed break the bond between the United States and South Africa. The South African government had a system of apartheid in place, which limited the public policy voice of the black majority. And so he really worked in Congress to push both Democrat and Republican administrations to do something different, to sever the ties. But that was a difficult thing to do. And it was difficult because this is taking place during the Cold War. And South Africa, the South African government, was very highly anti-communist. And so the United States government viewed it in its interest to have a relationship with South Africa because of South Africa's strong anti-communist position. So, for example, the U.S. actually had a NASA, space center, space tracking center, a U.S. space tracking center was actually housed down in South Africa, near Johannesburg, one of our systems there. So we had this really strong relationship with South Africa, and Diggs spent a good part of his career trying to sever the bonds, break the bonds, and he was not getting much traction.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I think Diggs is so adamant about what's happening in South Africa, too, is because he's also lived through the civil rights movement. He has seen apartheid in his own country, in his own front yard, backyard. You know, he was at Emmett Till's trial. So he's seen the violence of white supremacy up close. And so when he's in South Africa, they are experiencing sort of parallel policies, government, economically, socially, politically, in terms of how oppressive apartheid is to Black South Africans. And so he's really not just politically trying to galvanize people, but morally also trying to get people to see just how wrong apartheid is and how oppressive apartheid is.
Right. And he didn't just live through an apartheid system in the United States or see an apartheid system in the United States. He saw it end. And he saw like the potential transformative power of these movements, and that the U.S. had in 1965. It had gotten rid of all of these racist quotas on immigration, and it's happening as all of these new independent countries are emerging in Africa. And it does seem like there's a possibility that in this Cold War moment, you could actually change foreign policy to be more just and democratic and inclusive. And it's going so far in the other direction, especially in places like Rhodesia and South Africa, that it becomes this like moment where you see all of what could be and the frustrations of what is. And I think Diggs is sitting right in that moment and getting very, very frustrated with the U.S.'s position.
Kellie mentioned Diggs' moral argument here. This is one of the things I think that was so key about Diggs and his ability to be a very consequential Congress member. He always combined persistence, that is continually pushing Democrats, Republicans in the right direction, but also combining that persistence with moral clarity. Always bringing to the fore the fact, that these policies, the policies of apartheid in South Africa, the illegitimate regime in what was then called Rhodesia at the time, was all, anti-democratic and one could not morally stand, by the South African government, if you will. So one of the things that I say write about in the book is that this was one of the ways in which Diggs was so effective. He brought with him this persistence, his understanding of how the Congress worked, but he also brought with him this moral clarity that he always underscored his work.
But when he would pull a fellow congressperson aside, a white congressperson aside, and make the case, we need to get out of relationship with South Africa. And he met resistance. Was that resistance, as you described, like, well, they're a strategic partner because of the geopolitical moment we're in, yada, yada, we have a base there, yada, yada, yada? Or were there people who just didn't see it as a kind of moral issue in the way that he did?
I think it's a combination of both. I think Kellie's early observation that Diggs, experienced apartheid himself by living in the South as a member of the military during the Second World War. He understood what apartheid really meant for the individuals. But so there were some people who did not buy into that, obviously. At the same time, there were people who really believed strongly that in order to fight the spread of communism and to fight the Soviet Union, we had to have allies like the South African government, despite the policies that they adhered to.
And there were people like William F. Buckley and Pat Buchanan, who was a speechwriter for Nixon, who thought apartheid was good. They were like, there's a superior race in this country and they should be the ruling race, even though they're in the minority. And it's that whole jumble of people who are shaping both pro and anti-apartheid politics in the U.S.
I mean, look, I think a lot of people, when they think of the anti-apartheid movement, they think of it as something cresting through the 70s into the 80s. So I think it's just remarkable to know that there were people like this who were persistent starting in the 50s and 60s. What was the tipping point? Was he part of that tipping point? I mean, kind of where we're pinning this to this moment in the early 70s, but like, does he ever feel a sort of sense of vindication of having, pushed this issue to the forefront?
Well, he would live long enough to see Nelson Mandela get elected as the first Black president of South Africa. He would live long enough, in fact, to meet Nelson Mandela, who came to the U.S., I believe, in June of 1991 or whenever he got out of prison, and had, thanked Diggs and the Congressional Black Caucus and thank America for putting, strong economic sanctions on the South African regime. So, yes, I think, in the end, he, saw his work achieve the election of Nelson Mandela. And let me just say, I have to underscore the fact that Diggs not only relied on what was happening in the Congress, he helped form Trans-Africa, which became this very, very significant and important anti-apartheid lobby organization that Diggs helped put in place. And so Diggs always believed that in addition to working the Congress through the committee system and the seniority system, that you had to put external pressure on Congress to make things happen. So, that's why, we saw this defeat of apartheid. It wasn't simply the Congress and Diggs, but it's also Diggs recognizing, mobilizing at the grassroots level was very important. And this, in part, is what happened with the downfall of the apartheid regime in South Africa.
I love that particular dynamic. And Barack Obama would talk about this when he was president, that he needed people outside of the administration to put pressure on the administration because it gave them, it both helped shape public opinion, but it also gave them something to point to say, like, oh, we're hearing from all of these people that we need to do X, Y, and Z, and it helped to legitimate their actions on things. And so it's fascinating to think of Diggs as both working inside and also engineering the outside pressure groups.
Yeah.
He played a big role in sort of pulling in all of those folk who were interested in Africa, who was interested in the colonialism, imperialism. They all knew in the 60s and 70s, the person you need to hook up with to accomplish something in this line would be Charlie Diggs.
Hello, this is Matt from the Explorers Podcast. I want to invite you to join me on the voyages and journeys of the most famous explorers in the history of the world. These are the thrilling and captivating stories of Magellan, Shackleton, Lewis and Clark, and so many other famous and not so famous adventurers from throughout history. Go to explorerspodcast.com or just look us up on your podcast app. That's the Explorers Podcast.
All right, folks, I think we might be starting to get into holiday gift-giving panic mode. The calendar is ticking by, you're staring at that list and can't think of what to get people. Well, I've got a tip for you. When it comes to holiday gifts, I always turn to beautiful, timeless pieces of clothing and accessories that I know the person I'm giving it to will wear for years. And that is why I've been turning to Quince. I picked up a Mongolian cashmere sweater there for my sister. I mean, who doesn't love a nice new sweater? Over in the accessories section, I grabbed a really classy leather travel pouch set for a friend of mine, $60. Please don't tell them, by the way. It's a surprise. And of course, as I'm cruising around, I can't help but pick up a new pair of wool pants for myself. The items are incredible, they're luxury, they're affordable. Find gifts so good that you will want to keep them with Quince. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/thisday to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday. To my mind, the secret to buying a great gift is to be thoughtful and to buy something that also feels good for you to give to someone else. That's why I often turn to Uncommon Goods to find that perfect, unique gift. Uncommon Goods is packed with items that are high quality, unique, and often handmade or made in the U.S. Many are crafted by independent artists and small businesses, so every gift feels special and thoughtfully chosen. And here's another really cool thing that keeps me coming back to Uncommon Goods. With every purchase you make, they give back $1 to a nonprofit partner of your choice. They have donated more than $3.1 million to date. So check out the site. You will find gifts for the home, gifts for the garden, gifts for travel and the kitchen and jewelry and lots more. You will find the perfect gift at Uncommon Goods. So don't wait. Make this holiday the year you give something truly unforgettable. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/thisday. That's uncommongoods.com/thisday for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary.
In some ways, I feel like he's kind of like this unsung or silent hero. I mean, when I was reading about how he helped form the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, and it's like, oh man, he really is at the helm of all of these, major, what we think of the CBC today, his hands play a major role in that. And there wasn't a lot of Black elected officials then, but it was enough for him to say, we need to organize, we need to have our own group in order to maintain, our agenda.
Yeah. Diggs really believed that to push civil rights policies in the 50s and 60s and indeed the 70s, that Black Americans really had to be a part of a broad coalition. And so he was willing and was able, quite frankly, to work with Black radicals on one hand, Black conservatives on the others, all in the notion of trying to build a broad-based coalition to get civil rights policy through the Congress and to change, as we talked about earlier, policies around Southern Africa. So, for example, when Diggs came into office, there were only 2 other Black members of Congress.
Wow.
Adam Clayton Powell, the Black minister from Harlem, was somewhat militant Black, and the other person was William Dawson from Chicago. Okay, Dawson was just the opposite of Powell on race and politics. He was a Black conservative.
Wow.
When Diggs came into office, he discovered that Powell and Dawson did not talk together. They didn't work together. No, they didn't like one another. And so I believe Diggs saw that early on and firmly believed that Blacks should try to work in solidarity in the House. And so as the Black membership in the House increased, Diggs saw an opportunity there for Blacks to solidify and coalesce in what became the Congressional Black Caucus.
It's so interesting because you see the tactics and the strategies of the movement being brought into Congress, the things that he learned from his own experiences with segregation, with Emmett Till's murderers trial, with the Montgomery bus boycott, right? Like he puts together this alliance within Congress and the Congressional Black Caucus, and then he goes to get a meeting with the president, and Nixon is not interested. Folks who know much about Richard Nixon understand why he wasn't interested in meeting. And so they respond by boycotting his State of the Union, and that grabs headlines, right? That makes news. It embarrasses Nixon, and ultimately he gives in and he gives them a meeting. And they come to that meeting not just to meet the president, but to say, hey, here are all of these different things that you can do as president to make life better for Black Americans.
61 recommendations, to be exact, is what they give it.
It's a start.
It's a start.
And I'm sure Nixon read every single one of them very carefully.
Definitely, yes.
He came into that meeting, and it took about a year for the meeting to take place.
Wow.
Well, I mean, he came into the meeting finally, and one of the first things he said was, "Oh, I'm so glad to have this meeting." Everybody knew that was a lie.
Yes.
Of course. Yeah. Amazing. But
Are you now?
Can you paint a picture? Can you paint a picture for us a little bit of his personality? I mean, you've hinted at it, but you compare him a lot, I think, with Adam Clayton Powell, who is a sort of firebrand. Comes from a religious background, has this minister background, and Diggs seemed much more, quiet, working the halls of power, not conciliatory maybe, but like you said, persistent. Was that a personality trait, or was that a sort of strategic understanding of the moment?
I think it was both. I think personality and his understanding strategically how to operate in the Congress. Diggs had always been somewhat of a quiet personality. He had this very sort of calm demeanor. Some folk told me that he wore eyeglasses since he was a young boy, and they were thick eyeglasses for much of his life. And some people told me that they think he was sort of shy because of the eyeglasses and the fact they were so thick. Back in the day, they didn't have these fancy lenses now that you can make them look nice. But anyway, so he was a very quiet, unassuming kind of person. In fact, you probably would not pick him out to become any sort of politician because of his sort of quiet approach and personality. But at the same time, he was able to use that quiet demeanor in a way to help build relationships in the Congress. Now, he was a very forceful politician. He was not a pushover, but he understood, that you couldn't burn all the bridges you had to at some point across in Congress. So he had this real interesting approach. Maybe some of you, know these kind of people yourselves, who just have a way of getting along well with just almost everybody. My understanding is he seldom got upset on matters. He had a very calm personality. Now, he could be very forceful, and he was very forceful. Right. He was no pushover, but he just had a way of operating that worked well in an environment where you're trying to build a coalition with 535 people, 435 people in the House and 100 people in the Senate.
And it was effective. I mean, that's, I think, the takeaway is that this personality wasn't just about winning friends and influencing people, but it was about making change happen for the things that he cared about most. And I would just add to this already long list of things that he did. He also helped to establish home rule in D.C. And D.C. in the 1970s, that's when it was the chocolate city. And that's when establishing some new rights for D.C. was helping hundreds of thousands of Black Americans. So he was making an impact in all of these different areas while he was in Congress.
I think we have to now move to the sort of mid-'70s into the late '70s and talk about, the kind of last stages of his political career. In 1977, there's a Washington Post report that the Justice Department is probing Diggs for receiving kickbacks from some of his congressional employees whose salaries were inflated. You write in your book that he had money trouble, maybe was even living a little large in these times, maybe some, there was some gambling going on. that doesn't fully square for me with the sort of personality you described. So I'm interested to hear how kind of that happened. But then let's talk a little bit about some of the sort of scandals that start to arrive in the late 70s.
Well, my book is subtitled The Rise and Fall of America's Most Consequential Black Congressman, Charles C. Diggs Jr., and he had a big fall. And you know what? Many people remember him most for the fall.
Sure.
And not the great accomplishments he was able to pull off while in Congress for almost 25 years. Diggs really had a difficult time during much of his adult life controlling his personal spending. He had a difficult time managing his personal finances. I could never really figure out why that's the case, but he had a real difficult time of overspending. He would rely on his family's funeral home business to help him out. When the funeral home business collapsed, he no longer could rely on the funeral home to help with his spending, and he got involved in a payroll kickback scheme with his staff member, and that's what brought him down. You know, he was in a position as chair of a committee and chair of a subcommittee to violate the prerogatives of Congress. And that's what he did. He violated it and actually went to trial and was convicted on 29 counts of mail fraud and making a false statement on official documents. And he was served 7 months in prison after doing all these wonderful, wonderful things. And as I said, he is known more today for the payroll kickback scheme than for anti-apartheid or DC Home Rule or founding the Congressional Black Caucus, which I'm trying to correct that with this book. I think with Brian Stevenson, who said we should not be known for the worst thing that we ever did.
Yeah.
You know, this guy here should not be known. Diggs should not be known solely for the fact that he went to prison for 7 months. He should be known for the remarkable career he had. In the book, you'll see there's a chapter in there on Newt Gingrich, who helped bring Diggs down to some extent. Very fascinating story of the rise of Newt Gingrich and how it is connected, because Newt Gingrich will come into office and get elected the same year that Diggs is reelected after his conviction, and then Newt Gingrich will begin attacking the convicted Congress member.
That's fascinating because, of course, then Gingrich would go on to make his career about trying to bring down Democratic politicians through ethics investigations and through these kinds of investigations into their lives. So it sounds like Diggs is the first one, and then later it'll be Jim Wright, and then later it'll be Bill Clinton. But there's a through line there that I think is important.
No question about it, NIki. He sort of like tried out his strategy first on Diggs, and it was quite effective. When Newt began to publicly attack Diggs after his conviction, after his reelection, the Washington Post and all these editorial things began to write about the Diggs saga, which I think add to the fact that this is what many people remember him for.
Well, I know which chapter I'm starting.
Yeah,
with.
I know.
So look, we have to start to wrap up here, but I'm curious, I'm sure you've thought about this a lot, but I wonder if, as a political scientist, as someone who's watching our current politics, I'm curious if you see figures like Diggs today in our politics, and not even just black politicians, but even specifically just the idea of people who are these sort of quiet operators and strategic bridge builders or whatever. Are there any Charles C. Diggs kicking around?
Yeah, very few. One of the things that I think made Diggs so effective and is that, and this is very interesting, people actually thought he was a wealthy man.
Wow.
Yes, he had a reputation because of his family business that he had a reputation of being a wealthy person. So I really believe that because of that, people left him alone because they saw
That's
him
so
as this
interesting.
independent kind of person. And so, in a way, Diggs took many of these positions that was going against the grain of his party on civil rights. He was going against the grain of his party on South Africa. And he was able to do that in part because of this perception that he was this independently wealthy guy from Detroit
Wow.
who came from this wealthy family. Very interesting. But of course, he was not wealthy.
So people thought he was unbought, but really,
What's the Shirley Chisholm thing? The unbought and unbossed.
unbought and unbossed.
And I was
yeah.
like, oh, everyone now is just bought and bossed.
yeah.
Yeah, I think really it's something to that.
Yeah.
Really is. I think it allowed him to stand up against the forces in Washington, D.C. Today, so many of our politicians, elected officials, are tied to election campaign finance monies and what have you, and they are reluctant to push against the grain. We don't see that today. We do not see today in any of the party members of Congress pushing against the grain of their party leadership. Let me just add this. Diggs would also be trying to use the Congressional Black Caucus as a way to oversee what the Trump administration is doing. Diggs really believed firmly that the job of Congress was to oversee what's happening in the administration. It's called oversight. And we don't see that happening today at all. And if the Republicans wouldn't do it, he would probably push the Congressional Black Caucus and the Democratic minority to hold hearings.
Yeah, I mean, look, your book tells the whole sweep of his life, and as we mentioned, he did die in 1998. He did not live to see this moment. That you absolutely are right would have driven him absolutely crazy. But there's a lot more in the book for people to go check out. We will bring it to an end for our episode now. But the book is called House of Diggs: The Rise and Fall of America's Most Consequential Black Congressman, Charles C. Diggs Jr., and the author and our guest is Marion Orr of Brown University. Thank you so much for doing this. This is really fascinating.
Thank you. It was fun.
Nicole Hammer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
This Day is a proud member of Radiotopia, a network of independent, artist-produced podcasts. Don't forget to sign up for our America 250 Watch newsletter. Every Thursday, members get exclusive access to analysis and information about the upcoming semi-quincentennial, commentary from our team, and a list of fascinating things that happened that week throughout history. Join in, find out lots more at thisdaypod.com. You can also follow This Day Pod on Instagram, Blue Sky, and YouTube. Jacob Feldman is our researcher. Brittany Brown is our editor. My name is Jody Avirgan. See you soon.
Radiotopia.